everyone. I'm Randy Karraker, and welcome to SoundStory. It is great to have you with us as we hear about the life and times of John Waters, who is with us in studio. And we're just going to run through, John, your life story and provide this to your descendants, your family for the rest of eternity. First of all, thanks for stopping by. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Randy. This was a gift for my 5 children for Christmas, and I'm happy to do it. We've encountered one another prior, and so this will just be a good conversation.
And let's start off that way because here we are sitting in a studio together, and we did have the opportunity to interact many years ago.
We did. I was, at that time, about 20 years ago, I was the principal at Holt High School in Wentzville. I was there as principal 14 years, and you and our lost friend now, Demetrius Johnson, came out and did a couple of charter games of the week when we had an awfully strong football program then, and that's when we met. We wanted to make sure we were well taken care of.
And we appreciate that, and we'll get into your history in education. You were born in 1949 in Alton, Illinois. What was life like in the early 50s that you remember as you kind of ran around with your buddies in Alton, Illinois?
Well, that was, every house might have had one television. Mm-hmm. Your parents told you can't play in the house. And so from the time you could walk, you were out in the neighborhoods. And as you got older, then you stretched it out some and walked to your friend's house and used a bicycle. My dad was a bricklayer all his life, came out of World War II. He was a decorated Bronze Star Medal winner. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so all I saw was my dad get up and go to work every day. Kids stayed out until the street lights came on and did the things that every youngster does, played Little League Baseball, just a lot of sandlot baseball that you don't see much anymore.
I was going to say that in addition to the organized Little League Baseball, I'm sure that during the summers you and your friends were out picking up a game every single day.
Whether it was wiffle ball, cork ball, tennis ball, wherever it was, that's the way we operated in those days. We didn't have anything else to look at.
And sports really is woven throughout your life. How much of an impact did those young days have on what you became?
Well, I think I think the young days, the work ethic that my parents showed, my dad especially. Getting up and going to work every day. If he didn't work, he didn't get paid. Mm-hmm. And so we weren't a family that took vacations because he couldn't afford to take 2 weeks off. But I don't think that and my brother and sister and I ever went for anything that we needed that we didn't get. He made sure of that. But that work ethic, I think, from my dad especially, has lasted me through my life.
Tell me what you remember about your dad's hands as a bricklayer.
Calloused. Marked up,
strong,
handy. He did, even until I think I remember him telling me he changed out his own hot water heater when he was 80 years old.
Wow.
And that included taking it up and down the basement stairs.
Wow.
And so those kind of things, I think I learned from him that you can do those things. In our first home, I refinished the basement, and I think those skills that my dad gave me, and he gave me a Reader's Digest book of home improvements. Now you just look it up on YouTube.
Or you hire somebody,
That's right.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question, Jerry Rice's father was a bricklayer, and it used to be that his brother would throw him bricks out of the truck so that they could stack them up. And one of the reasons that Jerry Rice provides for his hands being so good is that he caught bricks throughout his childhood.
Yeah, my dad did bricklaying, stone masonry, those kind of things that were, and I never remember him ever missing a day of work for being sick. And I think that model for my brother and sister and I was a strong model.
Mm-hmm. And you move through your school days. What sort of a student were you, John?
Well, I would tell you, Randy, I wasn't the best student. It wasn't that I wasn't capable. I was more interested in hang out with my friends, and I think 5th grade was a breaking point for me because I didn't do very well, and the nuns that taught me at St. Patrick's School told my mom and dad, listen, if he's going to go on to 6th grade, he's going to have to come every day during the summer and clean the school with us and scrape the gum. And I quickly found out that was a good lesson, and I had a phenomenal 6th grade teacher. It was the first nun teacher I had. Her name was Joyce Hayes at the time, and she took an interest in her students, took an interest in what we were interested in, and that made all the difference in the world. And from that day on, I think my leaning towards education probably started there.
Really? So right around sixth grade.
I think so.
So, and then you move on to Alton Marquette High School. What are your memories of high school?
Well, I was involved in a lot of sports. I played football and baseball, and was fortunate to have really good teacher mentors. Had two Hall of Fame high school coaches, Ron Holtman, who gained his fame at Mary Institute Country Day, actually started at Alton Marquette and was there 10 years, and he was my football coach through my junior year, and then John Rogers followed, and John is in the Illinois Football Coaches Hall of Fame. They've both passed since then, and I think that those two were strong mentors for me, along with several teachers, both male and female, that took an interest in me and went out of their way to do more than just teach.
Yeah, what was, especially for the coaches, what was the mentoring that took place? What do you remember that you took away from them that they taught you, even if it was through osmosis?
Well, I think hard work, putting the time in. I never remember getting to high school and waiting for the coaches to get there. They were always there, and they were there when I left. And then, that model probably influenced the way that I tried to be as a leader as I moved through the ranks of teaching and coaching.
So you mentioned sixth grade being a difference maker for you. Did that change your performance as a student then once you got into high school?
It did. I made sure that I didn't have any close encounters after that, and I did what it took to get through and on to college then.
Sports is so organized now, and kids are zeroing in on one sport. You mentioned that you played multiple sports. How much did people concentrate, if they did at all, on one sport, or was everybody playing everything?
Everybody was playing everything, and I, it's a personal philosophy, but I still think that's a good thing. I know that when college coaches came through to take a look at some of our athletes when I was the head football coach at Alton Marquette, they'd always ask, what else do they do? Do they wrestle? Do they play basketball? And many times if they played basketball or wrestled, they'd come back in the evening and watch them on the mat or on the court. That's all changed now. There's a lot of specialization. I have a grandson that plays AA hockey, and he's all over the country.
It's amazing.
And costly also.
Right,
but he loves it, and whether he'll continue on with it because he's also an outstanding soccer player. But this specialization has really impacted high school sports for sure.
So, John, all of your descendants are going to hear this, kids, grandkids, and you decide to go to college. How many people in your family have gone to college before you?
Well, I'm the oldest of three. My sister Patty and my brother Rick, neither one of them finished school or went to college, and neither one of my parents did. And
so you were number one.
I was number one, and I don't know exactly. I didn't set out to make a mark doing that. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And I was fortunate enough to go through and fortunate enough to end up getting a teaching job.
You wind up at SIU-E, and you get your educational certificate there. Why did you choose SIU-E?
I started in the community college, the local community college, and that was a normal transition then, and got my first bachelor's in science and education from SIU Edwardsville. That campus looks a lot different than it did back in those days, for sure. But it was. I still remember the long walk from the parking lots to the classroom building.
Yeah, that's still there.
Yes, it is.
The long walk is still there. So, once you graduate from SIU-E, how did your life trajectory take off after that?
Well, I was fortunate enough to get hired in 1976 at Alton Marquette as a history teacher. And the principal was a man by the name of Lowell Brosmer, and he gave me an opportunity. And then I came on as an assistant football coach and assistant baseball coach. And, the private schools were notorious for not paying very well, so you always had a summer job, whether it was painting houses or umpiring or working at the Corey League fields. You always did something, and my wife at that time also worked full-time, and we, had three kids, so if I wasn't working in the summer, I was watching the girls, and are coaching Matt's Corey League teams, things like that. So I've been very fortunate. I've been in the right place at the right time, and that hard work ethic, I think people recognize it. If you take a chance on John Waters, he's going to work hard for you.
Where were you in life when you met your first wife?
Very young. I was very young, still in school. And we had Jenny, my oldest daughter, right away the first year we were married, and then Amy 2 years later, and then Matt 6 years after that. And their mom was and is still a great mom. And they're all very successful. Jenny is a 25-year kindergarten teacher. Amy is the assistant minority leader in the Illinois General Assembly and the House of Representatives in Illinois. And Matt is a bank president of Liberty Bank in Alton. And they have wonderful kids. All of them are college graduates, all professionals. And so we did something right, their mom and I did.
So they're probably listening to this, wondering how they wound up being so educated. Was it just a natural thing for you once you got into the education field and you've got these young kids? Did you maybe not force on them, but was a part of their growing up, and if so, how, education?
It was, because they would tag along with me. If I was setting up my classroom, they would tag along with me. If I was running a camp during the summer, they'd go sit in the gym while we're running the camp. When Matt was young, he started bouncing the basketball at Alton Marquette at 3 or 4 years of age. And so I think, and Jenny is one I remember very vividly, her playing school all the time, tables set up in the basement, telling her sister Amy exactly what to do. And so I think that it was just the normal expectation. It's not like we set them down and said, you're going to college. It was just the normal expectation. And, it wasn't easy financially, because working at a private school, there were, but you make it work.
And I would have to believe that in that time, that because we've got Vietnam happening, we've got a lot of things happening around the world, right? That was a tenuous time for your students. As you're a teacher, we think that we're living in the worst time right now, but man, there was a lot of consternation. We've always had a lot of consternation, but that time particularly, what was it like when you were dealing with kids then?
Well, especially in social studies and in teaching history, because you looked at past history. I taught both European and American history, and then you looked at current events, and you wanted to solicit the ideas of kids and let them respectfully agree and disagree with one another. And you didn't shy away from any. You weren't lambasted on social media if a topic came up and you wanted to have a conversation about it, or if you wanted to bring in a speaker. There was an opportunity to get to air everything out and still be best friends when you walked out the door.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah.
And I think that's changed significantly now.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That we're almost looking for reasons to be polarized, and that's one thing about that time. And I was very young at that time, but it was a situation where there was at least a desire to be unified. It seems like.
I would agree with you, and your parents, helped that, because you went home and you had dinner together every night, and pretty much that was a conversation between mom and dad, and you listened unless they asked you questions. And if you if you were late for dinner and I had practices, there was always a plate in the oven, not a microwave, a plate in the oven, and a lot of family discussions on topics like that. And of course, my dad, being a veteran, he was very supportive of the military, very supportive of America's role as in the world. And so, that's the way I saw that model. But I learned a long time ago that you have to give people an opportunity to talk. You have to give people an opportunity to express themselves. The role of a teacher is to help them learn how to agree and disagree appropriately. Not that it's not personal, and that's really difficult.
So I was going to ask about building a foundation for your philosophy in education, not just as a teacher, but as an administrator. And it sounds like to me that's the core, right? Is give people an opportunity to have a discussion and maybe even learn from each other.
Well, I think that and treating people well. Are they comfortable? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they are have a role in their school? As a principal, I sat down many days in the cafeteria with kids who were sitting by themselves, and I said, "You mind if I sit down?" Because if they don't feel like they belong, they'll find reasons not to come to school, or they'll find reasons never to speak up in a classroom, or they'll find reasons never to join a club or an organization or try out for a sport. And where I was as a head principal in Wentzville, there was so much growth going on. So you had new kids enrolling all the time, and I did every single tour of that building for 14 years.
Wow.
And the reason I did that is because I wanted them and their parents on a regular school day to see what a public high school looked like, because everything you hear is that, oh my gosh, there's so much bad going on. I would invite them in on a Friday morning and say, let's walk the building. And we didn't tell teachers we were going to stop in the classrooms. I wanted them to see what it was like. And I wanted them to have a contact with the principal, because if they needed something, then they knew who to go to. And if I build that trust with kids and parents, then when you have to deliver news that's not so pleasant sometimes, then they have a trust. It's really the way you treat employees the same way.
Sure.
It's about building relationships. It's being present for people, and it's being honest, because sometimes the news you have to deliver is not good. But you have to be the type of leader that when a family loses their child, you knock on their door at 8 o'clock the next morning and say, what can I do to help? When a child or a faculty member has a parent that they lose, you show up at the wake. And when a teacher gets a call and says, your kid's sick, go, I'll cover for you. And I think that I can't point to one person that made that model for me. I think back to my dad. He did lots of brickwork for the Ursuline nuns on their convent that was falling apart. And I never thought about that, but I do think that if you treat people well, you'll have lifelong relationships. And that doesn't mean you don't agree to disagree sometimes. But I do believe that that's the way that people deserve to be treated.
I'm sure there's no class in school, no manual for an administrator about, like you said, when a family loses a child. You obviously had that happen. So you just had to be John Waters. You had to be human about it, right? Take us through that.
Well, I remember one year we lost 4 students in about 6 weeks, and 2 in a car accident. One took his own life, and one that died of bacterial meningitis. Had not missed a day of school in 4 years. His father was a physician. His mom called him in with the flu on a Friday morning. His dad came home from the office at noon, had to carry him to the car, got him to the hospital. Those are hard times. That's when leaders have to lead. And it's not that you have some kind of program that you put on. You just are present. You give kids a space. They don't always need to talk to counselors. They just want to talk to one another and put their arms around one another. And they want to grieve together. And then when you knock on the doors of those homes, if you have a relationship, it's all okay, because you're not butting in. You just want them to know that we're here for whatever you need us for. And, or a child that you have to call in and say, listen, I got to take you home. Your house has been on fire. And you get there and the mother's in handcuffs because they found drug paraphernalia. And you just take the kid home with you then. There's some I miss those days with students and teachers.
Yeah, and that's leadership. I can see why you would. Okay, so you move on from Alton Marquette. What was next? What precipitated the move from Alton Marquette to the next?
Well, I coached for 18 years at Alton Marquette. Was part of an assistant coach. We won 2 state baseball championships. We finished second in football when I was a varsity assistant. I had a good 10-year. We had a good 10-year run. Won almost 70 games in 10 years as head coach. But my life was changing. I was divorced from my first wife. It was all we're still good friends. She's been remarried for years and years, and of course I have too. And so looking for a fresh start, I think, and had an opportunity. Dr. Bernie DeBray, who was the longtime superintendent in Fort Zumwalt, gave me a chance to be their activities director at Zumwalt North High School. And Randy, I still think I got the job because when I showed up to interview with Dr. DeBray, he was talking to a friend of his who had graduated from Notre Dame. And I heard that conversation in the hall. And I think I've told you that I coached a couple kids that went to Notre Dame. And so I led off with that. And I really do think that's why Bernie hired me. And I was there for 4 years as activities director and then 2 years as an assistant principal. And those were wonderful years in Fort Zumwalt. That was a growing district also. It's the wife for my wife now is assistant superintendent of schools. And I learned so much from Dr. DeBray over the years. But it was my first foray into public education. And I thought when I left Alton Marquette, I'd never find teachers like I saw there. Well, guess what? I found teachers because the range of kids at Alton Marquette was short. The range of kids in a public school is very wide. And so the requirements to be an outstanding teacher I found in those teachers at Zumwalt North. And I felt the same way when I left there to become a head principal. I'll never find teachers like that. And I got to Wentzville Holt, and I thought, oh, my goodness. And I found the kids at both Fort Zumwalt North and Wentzville Holt to be just like the kids at Alton Marquette. They were resilient. They played hard. They worked hard. They had fun. We'd have 12 or 1,400 kids at a homecoming dance in the gym.
Great.
And I greeted every single one of them at the front door. And we had very, very few issues. It's a high school. You're going to have kids that disagree with each other sometimes. I worked the lunch shifts every day. There were 4 of them. There were 500 in a lunch shift. And you do what you need to do. If there's a spill, you go. I got the mop and mopped it up. If you say, go get a custodian, what's that say to that student? Oh, you think you're better than a custodian?
Right.
That's not how you – and it wasn't like I planned to do that. It just – that came natural to me, and I'm very fortunate. I've been very blessed.
Why and how did you ascend from teaching into administration? How did that come about?
It just seemed like a normal progression to me. I would lie to you too, Randy. There's, when you go from private to public to administration, there's an increase in salary too. You want to accomplish more things. You like to do things, and you want to provide for your kids. And so it was during that time at Fort Zumwalt North that my wife Jen and I got married, got remarried, and we started off, and we had Patrick and Jack pretty quickly after that.
And those two are 26 and 24 now. And we'll get back to your kids a little bit later. But you also need a little bit more education. So you've got kids, and you're working, and you're doing Lindenwood, right, to try to advance your career. So what was it like at that time as you've got all these balls in the air?
Well, it was kind of crazy because my wife Jen was also a middle school principal at the time, and we did. Our family was from Alton, so when the boys were little and they were sick, we'd look at our schedules and say, okay, and we'd usually split those days. But we made it work. We had great support. Jen's mom would come over, and we lived in St. Peter's at the time, and she would help with the boys, and we had good support. We employed my former secretary from Fort Zumwalt North, and she'd get there at 6 in the morning, get the boys up and rolling because we were out of the house. I relished my days at getting my specialties at Lindenwood, and after I became a head principal at Wentzville, I taught for 12 years at Lindenwood one night a week as an adjunct, and I'm so proud of the fact that many of those, what I call kids, are now principals and assistant principals.
That's great.
And so I enjoyed going to school that one night a week because to get my specialist at Lindenwood, because you're rubbing shoulders with people that knew what they were doing. And I'd steal any idea I could, just like a coach. I've written many plays on a napkin and done that.
Well, it's interesting. I was going to ask about coaching because there's that old basketball adage that there's a big difference in those 18 inches when you move over to the big chair. What about when you get into the big chair in high school, when you're the principal? How different is it from being an assistant principal or one of the leaders among the faculty?
It's a lot different because now, we got to a school of almost 2,000 at Holt before they added additional schools. And so you're talking about every time you walk down the hall, there's 4,000 eyes watching you. And so if I walk by a piece of paper on the floor, What does that say to the student that's walking behind me? What does that say to the teacher that's at their door? Or, you know, do you have a minute? When they ask that question, you have to have that minute.
Sure.
And not just for the adults, but for the kids, because when a kid asks their principal, do you have a minute? They need that minute.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you just have to be present. And I used to call it, I'd tell my secretary, Denise, I'm going out to check the oil. And I was out of the office more than I was in the office, because that's how you have to operate. You have to see what's going on. And if I felt sorry for myself, I'd just drop into a band room or drop into a choir class or drop into a biology class and see all the good things that are going on in there. So when modeling is the most important thing that we do. So if somebody saw me pick up a piece of paper, and I learned that from Dr. DeBray at Fort Zumwalt, I never turned around and said, look, I picked up this piece of paper, but somebody saw me pick up that piece of paper. Somebody saw me grab that mop in the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. Somebody saw me grab that tray. And that's modeling is the best thing that we do.
And I would guess that your 5 children and grandchildren are listening right now and saying, you know what, that's stuff that he did at home too, right? Do you think that you sent that message to your own children too, those messages?
Well, it would probably depend on who you ask. My mom, being a stay-at-home mom, was what we would call kind of a clean freak. And so she was, you know, but that kind of went with that role at that time, you know. And so I would say that, yes, there are some things. My wife would tell you now that I don't pick my socks up and things like that. But I would say that those lessons that I learned from my mom and dad modeling, and from those people that worked really hard. My high school principal was the same person that hired me. He also worked at the Grand Theater in Alton at night, cleaning up the theater afterwards, because he had a bunch of kids. And I just think that he never told me that, but I knew that, and I never told anybody that. But I think that's just, you know, when I remodeled the basement, everything was put away that night for the next night.
How long did that take you, by the way? And what did you do? What did that entail, remodeling the basement?
Well, I mean, I had some help, but, you know, I did all the electric and did all the drywall, and I had some help with the plumbing, did all the insulating. But my boys were young. It was, as a matter of fact, the first year we used it was the World Series of 2006.
Okay.
And I wanted the boys, and I hope that they remember, Pat and Jack, that Dad did that someday, and I can do those things. And I wanted them to see that model, that Dad would get home from work, from being a principal, and he'd still go down for 2 or 3 hours and piddle around and work in the basement. And then we'd expanded and made a game room for the boys, which eventually became a workout room. And I just think, and my dad did that. I watched him finish our basement.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Because with my dad, he would take me along, or, you know, downstairs or whatever he was working on. And it wasn't, here's how we do this, son. It was, okay, you're going to help me. And I learned through watching him. Was your dad saying, here's how you do this, or were you just with them and you learned because you were observing?
A little bit of both. I know when in the first house I lived in the early 70s, I finished that basement, and we had to break the concrete floor to put a bathroom in. And I can remember my father bringing a jackhammer home from the job, and we jackhammered that floor up, you know, that trough where you had to put the drain line in, and he helped me with the electric, and it's just those lessons you use. Now, I would tell you nowadays, the first thing I do is go to YouTube to find out how to do something, and it's not bad.
There's a lot of knowledge there.
There really is, and sometimes you have to do things over because you put together something that's not done right. But I'm far from perfect. I've just been very blessed that, and I have good friends that if I need help, we moved in the last year from a 3-story or 2 floors and a finished basement to a 2-story, and so moving is not for the faint of heart.
No, it's a hassle.
It really is.
Okay, so you've had multiple careers, and I want to get to all of them, but you were a very accomplished coach, couple of players in the NFL. First of all, who are the players that you coached that made it to the NFL?
Well, probably the name that people know is Craig Hendrick. He was the kicker and punter for the Packers and then the Titans for years, and Craig earned that. He worked like crazy. There was hardly a weekend day that he and his dad wouldn't drive by my house, pick up the bag of footballs, go up to the middle school field, and kick and punt. And then I coached Tom Roth at Alton Marquette, and Tom had a drink of water with the Saints, as I recall, and he's turned out to be a high school administrator. Craig has made 18 years in the NFL, played for Lou Holtz. The only 3 coaches he ever had were Lou Holtz, Jeff Fisher, and John Waters. And
that's amazing.
And so, and we stay in touch. But I also coached a lot of 150-pounders that worked their tails off and helped make us successful. In those days when I was head coach, the only thing we did during the summer was lift and run, conditioning. Nowadays, the people are all over at camps, and I'm not saying I'm opposed to that. It's just it's a different game now.
Just from the sports coaching slice of your career, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud when I went back last year for a reunion, and there were over 40 kids from that state runner-up team that – it's like family still.
Mm-hmm.
It's and they say, Coach, do you remember when you said? And I value those relationships that I have, and not just for the athletes, for those kids that were in marching band, for those kids that were stinkers, kids that I had to say, listen, you can't act like that here, and you're going to have to spend some time out of here. And then I'd pick up the phone and call, and in most cases, because of the relationships I had with parents were supportive. They were having the same. But some of those kids have been kids that have stayed in touch with me forever and ever. And I never did things like Facebook until I left the principalship. And it's wonderful to see kids and their own kids now.
And one of the things about being a high school coach, because you're really at the foundation of a kid's team career, and you are at your core a leader. And right then, when a kid comes in as a freshman football player, he's learning about teamwork and accountability and doing the right things for teammates. But the other thing, from your perspective, is, and Dick Vermeil said, the thing that he was most proud of as an NFL head coach, is that he was able to get people to do things that they didn't think they could do. Is that part of what you did?
I just got a note from a former player that played for me in 1982. And he said, Coach, I want to make sure I take a chance to thank you. And I run into this young man, and we communicate some. He said, at John Burroughs, in a big football game, you looked at me and said, Gibby, you can play with these kids. And he said, and you put me in there. And he said, that's been a message for my life. And honestly, Randy, I don't remember saying that to Matt, but he told me I did, and he remembered it. And, because sometimes – in those roles that I've been, you get cross with kids too. And if I've treated kids wrong, as a principal, there were times when I'd think at the end of the day, listen, I didn't handle that very well. I'd go find that student and say, listen, Randy, you know what? You and I have a good relationship. I want you to know before you go home that I could have handled that better. Most of the time they'd look at me and say, Mr. Waters, I feel the same way. I didn't handle it very well either. I think you've got to be willing to take a step back and say, gosh, I didn't handle that very well.
It's pretty cool that you're able to have these communications with kids, because the way I look at it, sometimes you don't treat them as grown-ups, but you allowed them to be grown-ups in a situation like that too, right? That somebody would say, I didn't handle it very well. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty self-aware.
Well, I think you had to. I mean, Randy, I was out in the parking lot. I was at the front door when they came in. It's just – I didn't know any other way to do it. And I do know that I was following a head principal that stayed in his office most of the time, and I knew you can't do that. There were a lot of things I didn't know about being a principal, about curriculum and instruction, but I did know about people. And I found in my life that if you treat people well and you tell them what a good job they've done, and when they don't do a good job, you craft it in a way that it's a learning experience for them. How could you handle this differently? I mean, because if all you're going to do is punish kids all the time, that doesn't work. Going to your room doesn't work because it doesn't change behaviors.
Why is being a high school principal the best job ever?
Oh, it clearly is, because you hit the ground running every day. Our classes started at 7:30. We opened the building at 6, so somebody had to be there. You're there when the day custodians get there. I remember them well, the two ladies that were the day custodians at Holt, and they loved their school. When you see them taking them up to the top of the lockers to get the dust off of, and they'd say to me, hey, I just want you to know on our break, we run up and get a soda and a lottery ticket. Go ahead, we'll be fine for those 15 or 20 minutes. Those are the kind, and then, when they lose a loved one or lose a spouse, you make sure you mourn with them, and you their names were Joyce and Judy, as a matter of fact, at Holt High School. But I think the other reason that it makes it such a great job is the fact that you have a group of adults who work like crazy as a teacher. I mean, they prepare, they grade, they interact with all kinds of kids. They teach 6 out of 7 classes a day, and you want to make sure that it's a good working environment for both the adults and the kids.
Okay, now I want to get into something that is talked about a lot, and that is the change in young people and just the change in society. But let's start with this. From the time that you started teaching in the early 70s until the time that you retired as a principal, what was the biggest change in high school students?
Well, I think part of the change was that there was such an emphasis for so long about sending kids to college. I mean, because if you weren't going to college, because your parents said, it was. We tried to pound the round peg into the square hole for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I think we finally realized now that there are a lot of things. There's nothing wrong with college. It's nothing wrong with a stepping stone. But so many kids go to college, borrow a ton of money, don't complete, where they could have walked into an apprenticeship when they're in high school.
Sure.
And, in my wife's district in Fort Zumwalt, they have 40 apprenticeships, paid apprenticeships for juniors and seniors now. They're out working, and they get their credentials when they're finished.
That's great.
And I would say I feel bad because I was a typical principal that we got judged on how many kids went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd say that the move towards careers and college is a big difference. I do think social media has changed. I mean, I left the principalship in 2014, and even between these 10 years, it's even intensified more.
Is that a good change or a bad change? I want to do this best change since you started and worst, and obviously this is one, but if there is a best and a worst, and how does social media fit in there?
Well, I think social media used properly is wonderful. I think all the way to artificial intelligence, if it's used properly, you have to make sure that teachers and kids know what is the proper way to use things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, when Twitter first started, I jumped on that, and it was at Holt Principal, because it gave us a chance to tell our story. Because if we don't tell our story,
mm-hmm.
somebody else is going to tell it.
Right. Control your narrative, right?
And you can walk out of here and hear everything bad that's going on in public education. I'm here to tell you, you would be able to come into my building every day. And I always tried to tell our kids, make sure that any visitor, before they get to the office, has been 3 times asked, how are you? Good morning. Is there someplace I can help you? Because that's the kind of climate we wanted to bring. You can walk into any work, any building, any school, and it doesn't take a person long to figure out what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd say that I think social media used properly is great. Used improperly has caused a lot of hurt and pain for kids.
And one of the things that you brought up is unification versus polarization. And we do, as adults, I observe a great deal of polarization in what I am around. Did you see that in high school? Have kids become less unified, or are they, because I just don't have a read of the situation?
Well, I would say that realizing at the point that we're talking today, I've been out 10 years from the high school, but I will tell you, school spirit and the love for your school helps a whole lot. Wearing that blue and gold, or at Fort Zumwalt North, that green and gold, or at Marquette, that blue and white. That name on the front of that jersey, as many people have said, is so much more important than the name on the back of that jersey. And I would run through the wall for Ron Holtman or John Rogers, and I feel like my players, and I not only coach men's sports, I was the women's softball coach at Marquette, and during a time when that was not considered to be an important thing, and I wanted to make sure it was important. that those girls were treated properly. So if the boys played 35 baseball games, the girls played 35 softball games. And those kind of things that you do make the school setting it's a shame that many people in our world never step foot inside a high school and see the posters and could you step inside and see an altercation? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely you could, because it's a high school. And so I would say that as you can tell from my passion, I miss those days.
Yeah. Well, and so I asked you what you're most proud of from a coaching standpoint. What about from the teaching administrative standpoint of your career? What's John Waters most proud of from that perspective?
Seeing those young teachers mature into great teachers.
Uh-huh.
When I was the first few years that I was teaching, I thought, man, I must be pretty good. I look back at some of those strategies that I used, and I would say, oh my goodness, don't ever do things like that. I probably, I harmed those kids. But you learn as you go along in the business you're in, what works and what doesn't work. And I think that what works is paying attention to kids, paying attention to teachers, listening, being present, being accessible. If you're beating the kids out the door every day, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And they know when you're there at their games or their musicals. I was in one of the musicals at Holt High.
Really?
And those are things that are to go out at 6:30 in the morning on the golf cart and listen to the marching band. Mm-hmm. That's exhilarating stuff.
That's awesome. All right, so let's move on now to your family. What is the favorite Waters family tradition that you have?
Well, when I was a youngster, every holiday season, every Christmas Eve, we went to my grandmother's house on my mom's side, and all the cousins and aunts and uncles were all there. And on Thanksgiving, we went to my Aunt Betty's farm in Brighton, Illinois, and where there was no indoor plumbing and things like that. And, so I saw those things, and now we've carried those traditions over to Christmas. We had about 40 at our house, and we host it now.
With indoor plumbing.
With indoor plumbing,
Good,
yeah. We do have indoor plumbing. And we not only invite our family, but any friends that we know that have nowhere else to go on Christmas. Our doors are open, and that has become a tradition. This was our first Christmas in our new home, and I think it takes some time for that. If you're in 25 years in another place, it takes a while for that to transition. And we still have Jack at home with us. He's 24, but I became a dad again in my mid-40s, and because Jen didn't have any kids. And so when we had Patrick and Jack, I had to make that commitment. That's why I still work, really. I enjoy work. I tried to retire after the principalship. It was not for me. It just wasn't. And I still wanted to work with people. And so, we have a great holiday celebration on Christmas Eve.
Great. And I want to get to your latest career, but I also want to find out about the kids, your kids. Did they become fans of the schools that you were at, especially when you were coaching? Were they in the stands watching your games?
Well, my older ones were, because they went to Alton Marquette. Jenny and Amy were both students when I was teaching and coaching there. The year that Matt became a freshman at Alton Marquette is the year that I went to Fort Zumwalt. And but yeah, they grew up in the gyms. The girls did, and Matt did, and they grew up in the gyms. And and then when Patrick and Jack were growing up, I coached their summer teams, and as much as I could, and were involved in their lives. And Jack was on Patrick retired from all competitive sports in third grade, but we bought him a great golf swing and followed him around on the junior PGA during the summer. And then Jack played on a select baseball team until he got to high school and realized he was not going to get drafted in the major leagues, and played 4 years of high school lacrosse.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And so I would say that having Patrick and Jack a little bit later for me has kept me young. Kept me working, honestly. And they have been. Patrick went to Ole Miss. He got a degree in accounting, is a CPA, works in Chicago as an analyst. Jack went to the University of Missouri J School, graduated, worked for the football for Eli Dirkwitz for a year as a senior equipment manager. Did some internships in local radio and television, and works for State Farm right now. You know, he hadn't found that spot yet, as you know your business very well. It's not the easiest, but those two being born while I was in my 40s have been such a blessing. You know, all five have been. All five are different, Randy, and the fact that we made it away, both the older kids, Mom and I, and then Jen and I made it possible for the boys to get their degrees. I'm over the moon proud of those kids.
And I want to touch on each of them, and I want you to, just because they're listening, tell them what you think of them and tell us a little anecdote about each. Let's start with Jenny Scanlon.
Jenny is a 25-year teacher. She's been playing teacher since she could walk. You know, she played sports. You know, I remember when she started playing softball, she got her nose broke the first time we played catch. But she is, from what people tell me, the best kindergarten teacher around. And that takes a real hero to be a kindergarten teacher and to do it for 25 plus years. She has a daughter, Ellen, my granddaughter, who is also a teacher now in Springfield, Missouri, a special education teacher.
Great. And
And Jenny has a son, Max, my grandson, Max, who's a junior at the University of Tennessee in the School of Architecture.
that's fantastic.
And I would say that Jenny has a heart of gold. She works at the food pantry in her time off. She's just an outstanding person. Her husband Andy is. It's just a wonderful thing. They live in O'Fallon, so we see them quite often.
Great. All right, 2 years younger than Jenny is Amy.
Amy Ellick, she's married to her husband Don. Amy has two kids. Carolyn, who also went to the J School at Mizzou. She's now in. Carolyn is a reporter for the Sheridan, Wyoming Press, and she moved to Wyoming and writes 5 articles a week. And her brother Adam, my grandson Adam, is a junior student at Alton Marquette. Amy is a state legislator. She's a CPA she went to University of Illinois, a CPA by trade, and she's now the assistant minority leader in the Illinois General Assembly. Amy was that person that when she went to school, everything was lined up by color, clothes, you know. Jenny, she's more, you threw it all in the basket, and that's just the way they are, and they're best friends. Jenny and Amy are,
so great.
and so I couldn't be, and they're close to their younger brothers, Pat and Jack.
That's great. I was going to say, Jenny dealing with a bunch of kindergartners every day, and Amy basically dealing with a bunch of kindergartners every day.
That's exactly right. They're both, you know, they both have a sense of service. Amy serves her constituents. Jenny serves her kids.
Okay. Your third is Matt, who's 44 now. Tell us about Matt.
Well, you know, Matt was 6 years after Jenny and Amy, and being a coach, we were excited when we had Matt, and you know, from the time Matt could walk, he was tagging along with Dad. You know, he was on the buses going to games. He was shagging fly balls pregame before baseball and softball games. Was a good athlete. Matt eventually was all conference in all 3 sports in high school.
Wow.
Was a high school quarterback. But he was 5'9", and he was about 150 pounds maybe. He ended up playing 2 sports at Quincy University. Played football as the kicker, and then played baseball, and has 4 wonderful kids. He's married to Lindsay. Lindsay's a financial analyst, financial leader, and Matt and his wife have dug into their kids' activities. Madeline is a sophomore in high school. She's an outstanding soccer player and plays, you know, has been on great teams. William is in 7th grade. He plays for the top Scott Gallagher soccer team and for the Sting AA hockey. Sophia is a grade behind William, and she's also on a really good soccer team. And then Charlie was their surprise. He's 5 and in kindergarten, and he's quite the young man. My grandkids, and we were all together at Christmas time. I try to get out and see them as much as I can. The older ones have phones, so Grandpa can text them.
That's great.
And tell them good things and how proud of them I am. And it's just so Matt and Lindsay, they both work hard, but their lives are their kids.
Yeah. And what kind of a personality is Matt?
Matt is a service person. He's in the service industry. Being a bank president, you serve others.
Mm-hmm.
Matt's never been afraid of work like the girls have not been, and they all have great hearts, and they are all support the underdog. And if I leave them that attitude, that would be great.
And then your first with Jen, 18 years younger than Matt, is Patrick.
As I said earlier, Patrick retired from competitive sports and probably was the right thing to do in about third grade. But Patrick was the type of kid that if he was sitting in the dugout trying to play baseball at age 7, he'd have the coach's clipboard in his hand.
Uh-huh.
And he'd be analyzing and keeping score and things like that. And then developed to be a really fine golfer. And Jen and I both made the decision to send the boys to St. Louis U High. It was just it was our choice, and we did. And Patrick played on the golf team at St. Louis U High, which is great. And he went to Ole Miss.
Any golf there?
He did not golf there, but he golfed a lot there. Believe me, because I got the receipts, for the green fees. But Patrick got involved in his fraternity, Delta Psi. He became their financial person for 2 years. He has stayed in that business now because he's on their alumni board of their fraternity, and they're going to build a new fraternity house. And so he's deeply involved in that. He is not married. He has a steady girlfriend. We love Mia. And we look forward to they get home several times. Matter of fact, they'll be home in the middle of February for the Super Bowl weekend.
Great. And then you mentioned your youngest, Jack, is still at home. Tell us about Jack.
Jack is a remarkable young man, has more skill and talent than he knows. He went to Mizzou, did very well, but Jack was like his dad. Jack, Jack, when I say he was like his dad, friends and people were more important than the classes themselves, and he did well. He got his degree. He studied abroad one semester in Barcelona during COVID.
Oh, great. Well, maybe not so great.
He worked for the National Baseball and Softball Federation there when he was there.
Great.
Traveled around Europe when he was there. They got called home early that spring. And then Jack tried to get into the business of radio and television. He worked for Bally's or Fox Sports Midwest. He worked in the booth with Dan one summer. He did some work in there, and then he needed something more steady. So right now he's at State Farm. He's doing great. Jack is so knowledgeable. He is not just about sports, and he is knowledgeable about sports, but he's knowledgeable about a lot of things, and he has a good head on his shoulders. We're anxious to see what out there for Jack in the future.
That's a great.
He'd be a wonderful teacher, but we didn't push it. But it wouldn't surprise us to see Jack go back to school and do something different. But we're not sure yet.
That's a great description. And then your bride of 28 years, Jen. Tell us about her personality, and all about Jen.
Well, Jen's my hero. My dad was my hero, but I've had several heroes in my day. But she is, she's assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction in one of the largest school districts in the state of Missouri and one of the highest achieving. And she has a passion about what good teaching is and a passion that we give kids a chance to learn how to read. And because if you cannot read, life is very difficult for you. We've made it balanced. We really have. It's pretty remarkable that we were both principals at the same time. She was a middle school principal for 11 years. I was a high school principal for 14. Before that, she was a teacher and a coach in Roxana, Illinois, coached tennis there. She is well respected in our region. when she started that role, the role she's in now, they were just okay. There had been so much growth that the focus was on buildings and trying to keep seats for kids. We're a good team. We're both pretty competitive. We both love sports. Randy, I went to the Blues games first year I was in high school. Their first year I was in high school. And Jen and I went to the Winter Classic. The boys and I went to the Winter Classic. We watched Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals in the Bahamas at a Margaritaville place.
Fantastic.
Because we had a trip planned. We were at the third day of the Ryder Cup in Whistling Straits, Wisconsin. So we've been very fortunate. And Jen is competitive. She loves sports. Our 18-year-old dog's name is Yachty, and we got him in 2006.
Oh, wow.
And so sports are a big part of our life. Family is. Her mom is, both my parents are no longer here, but her mom is still here and travels with us. We don't travel unless we take Gail with us. We love the theater. We love travel. We can dig into good movies. We like music. We love good music. We go to concerts when we can. I've just been very, very blessed along the way. And I don't think it's me. I think it's the people that I surround myself with, and Jen being one of those. As I said earlier, all of my kids had great moms, and because I was raising everybody else's kids.
Right. Yeah, you were with all of those students. Tell your kids and your grandkids, because you and Jen, obviously, from a career standpoint, were running in the same circles. How did you meet?
Well, we taught together, and that just that just started, and got married in '95, and we're still going. And I'm going to work as long as she does. I think work for me is great. I have a team now at Education Plus of about 48 consultants that work in schools all over the state of Missouri, and we support the work of the elementary and secondary State Department. And so it tickles me when I see good people out helping young teachers, helping young administrators, because in many cases, when I became a principal, they gave me the keys and said, "Go get it.
Go get them." Right.
It wasn't anything to, and the same with being a teacher. And now we want to make sure there are lots of things in place for kids. And so Jen and I don't agree on everything when it comes to a lot of things, but what we agree on are the right things, and that's our kids come first. I don't think our kids have any idea how much we love them, even though you tell them, and they don't get it until they have kids of their own, and they don't realize that, oh, you do stay up and worry about me when I'm not home at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you do, I'm driving back to Chicago. You do worry about me, and as I said, my wife and my kids and my family and the kids that I've interacted with and the adults have been my life, and I couldn't be more proud that I was just part of that ride.
This might be the same question that you just gave the answer to, but your kids and your grandkids and great-great-grandkids are going to be able to listen to this. What do you want them to know about Dad or Grandpa or great-grandpa?
Well, how much I loved them, and how much I thought about them, how much I prayed for them. They all have had great parents, and they know what's right. They know what to stand up for. And I would say that to remember me, would remember the good times we had together. When my time's up, I don't want a pity party. I want them to celebrate and be together. There's nothing like being together with those that you love. And when I say that, it's those thousands of kids that I taught too, because I run into them now and they've got their own kids with them. Or I run into their parents and they want to tell me about their kids. And I'm the lucky one. They weren't the lucky one. I'm the lucky one that had that opportunity. And, I would want them to think that, helping others is a big deal.
Final thing here, with all of those young people whose lives you have impacted as a teacher or an administrator, and 5 kids and 10 grandkids, what has made John Waters happiest?
Well, I think seeing my children do well, seeing my children be happy, seeing my grandkids and being around them. But it also makes me happy to see kids like Dantiel Daniels who grew up with 5 or 6 kids in a room and now works for Tulane University. He was an all-state basketball player and would come to me and say, we're not going to have Thanksgiving. And we made sure he did have Thanksgiving. And he wouldn't say that to me unless we had a relationship. And I would tell you that there are hundreds of stories, and some of them I've forgotten now as I get older, but hundreds of stories like that if you're walking out of the building and a kid walks in and says, hey, have you got a minute? Oh, no, I got to get home. That's not how you operate. If you do say I got to get home, they will remember that too. And so I would say that from my parents and grandparents all the way through my children, if something happened to me today, I'd say a life well fulfilled.
And a life well lived, absolutely. John, this has been such a pleasure. It's been great to reconnect with you. Thank you so much, and continued success with your kids and your grandkids. I'm glad we were able to do this.
Thanks, Randy. I appreciate it.
That's the sound story of John Waters. I'm Randy Karraker. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this sound story.